I'm starting this episode off with an announcement. I'm trying something different this year and adding YouTube videos to my episodes. I didn't want my lack of video editing knowledge to stop me from posting, so if you have any feedback, let me know in the comments section. Link will be in the show notes. Anyways, back to the episode. Welcome to the Tap In with Tako podcast. I'm Tako, and my goal here is to help you transition from the military to your civilian career or business. Today, I bring on Jeff, who is a decorated Army Special Operations veteran, a business owner, and now an author. We talk about his formula to overcome obstacles during the military transition, his book, how jiujitsu and military intertwine, and so much more. If you're an aspiring business owner and want a glimpse into the mind of a veteran business owner, this episode is for you. Hope you enjoy it.
In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. Nikes on the dash, Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. Nikes on the dash, Nikes on the dash.
So to kick things off, thank you, Jeff, for being here for the Tap In with Tako podcast. Super excited to talk today. Today's main topic, we're going to be talking about your book that you wrote, All the War They Want, and a couple other things that are related to military veterans and service members and their spouses related to the transition to the civilian side of things. So to kick things off, Jeff, I'll let you give a quick little intro of who you are.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. You said the name. My name is Jeff Engel. Currently, I wear a couple of hats. I'm the chairman and president of Conquest Cyber, which is a pretty cool cybersecurity software company that I've been building for almost the last 5 years. I'm also the CEO of a cybersecurity compliance company that's focused on supporting the defense industrial base, really small and mid-market businesses that we run with one of our key partners. You mentioned I recently released a book. It's called All the War They Want. And really it's a blueprint for how I was going to build the business and have been building it, and why we in the company approach things a little bit differently than many other technology companies. And a lot of it's informed by my experience, both in the conventional Army, where I spent the first 4 years, and some of the examples of what not to do from that time. And then my experience in special operations. And really, we use that as the model for what right looks like when you have a really hard mission. You need to do it with limited resources, and you don't have the option of failure. So that's what the book's about. It's really about how to find something you care about enough, how to think through it, how to build a team, and ultimately how to communicate with people from different walks of life and backgrounds, all to move towards the same key objectives. And then the last part is really about the role of the leader and what my job is in this company, but really, for anybody who has a passion and a complex problem they're trying to solve, what their role should be in making that happen, really at the scale of a movement rather than just a business or a particular cause.
A couple things I want to touch on there that kind of stood out to me is first is like your business. That's awesome. You're building your business. Do you, I'm assuming, do you hire military veterans? You bring on veterans into your company there?
Absolutely. I'm a big proponent. I've talked about it at other times frequently. So if you guys have seen anything I've been on, I think special operations veterans in particular, but really all veterans, just my experience has been with more on the special ops side. Their understanding of risk and the adversary's mindset and strategy has a lot of applicability to what we do, but they also tend to not really know that what their DNA, and not just their skills and their attitude and their experience, but what makes them who they are, has a lot of very effective application to solving the cybersecurity challenge. So my business being focused on supporting critical infrastructure and protecting national security, it ends up that veterans have a very warm home here, get to stay in the fight.
That's awesome. I'll make sure to plug in all that information in the show notes in case there are special ops or any veterans that are interested.
Yeah.
The other point I want to touch on is your book, and there's things I want to ask you about your book, and there's some topics, but I just want to call out, like, I was able to read the digital version of your book, and there's so much great content in there. I could probably, do my own episode of just breaking down all the concepts. So I probably will do that in the future, but there's a lot of good things I want to unpack in there. Just wanted to share that with you. So appreciate you sharing that with me before
Yeah,
we
I'm
recorded.
glad you enjoyed it. I mean, it's the title we ended up settling on for the book, I think, was pretty apropos. Yeah, I've spent my entire career fighting in one way, shape, or form, and really an entire life. And my concern around veterans who make the transition, they typically move around a bunch of jobs, or they end up in hard times, and it's because it's not always easy to translate the level of focus and dedication and mission orientation and purpose that you have into the civilian world. So finding other people that want to embrace a cause, they want to continue fighting, maybe even do it in a different way, but something to harness your passion and focus and give you that purpose is absolutely critical in order to avoid going down some of the more negative roads that an unfortunately large number of our veteran population experience as they make the transition out of the military.
Yeah, let's talk about that more. So, a lot of the times, right, when you're getting out of the military and transitioning into a different sector, you want to start your own business. There's a lot of different obstacles and challenges that kind of come your way. And one quote in the book that really stood out to me was, I'm just going to read it off. It says, "What they lack in skills, they more than make up for the endurance and courage and determination. They're not afraid to lose because they know what it means. They will get better." And so, my question here to you is like, there's a bunch of challenges we face. Like for you, when you were getting out, what was the hardest part about your transition? And what do you recommend veterans that are kind of in a similar situation as you, like overcoming those challenges?
I think recognizing my personal formula for managing my focus and my emotions. I ended up transitioning out of special operations into a defense agency, and it was like going from Call of Duty to Office Space, cubicle farms, and all of that.
Mhm.
And that was a really good contrast. I had a lot of extra time on my hands because the pace that people operate was different. So I put it to good use, finishing my undergrad and graduate degrees and that type of thing. But as soon as I didn't have all of that on my plate, and even kind of when I did, I knew that I wanted to do cool stuff that made an impact, and so I ended up working in organizations that had a really cool mission that I got to jump into and be a part of. But I realized that if I didn't have a third leg of the stool, then it was not going to be a good location for me, a good fit. So I realized a formula that was, it's doing cool things that make an impact with people you like. If I don't have all three, then I'm not going to do it anymore, right? And most people sacrifice some element of that for work, and they start exchanging their time and their labor for money, and then their life happens after that. Well, I'm here to tell you, there's no such thing as a separation between work and life. It's all life, right? Whether
Mhm.
you're out there farming or you're in an office space working on a computer, if you don't believe in what you're doing, if you don't see the contribution and the value and the purpose behind it, and you don't surround yourself with people who are working as hard towards the same goal, you're not going to be in a good headspace particularly if you've had that experience before. It's like being a professional athlete or a special operations veteran like I am. I've worked on really elite teams. Everybody was focused. Everybody ran their play. Yeah, you could count on that running back to pick up the blindside block. All of that was there. And when you get into the commercial sector, most organizations aren't run that efficiently. They're subject to the Pareto principle, right? 80% of the work is completed by 20% of the people. That's typically not a great fit for people who've been in those types of high functioning organizations. So for me, it was finding my formula. It worked out great, and now I try to help other people find theirs, and that was really the target of the book. Finding something that you care about enough to take it on yourself, even if somebody else is not doing it. Right? If you need to
Right.
create the movements, if you need to solve that complex problem that other people haven't been able to solve, you need to jump in. But it was also a bit of communicating to the world, if this is something that, if what we do is something that you're passionate about, then you'll have a great home here, doing cool stuff that makes an impact with people who are who you're going to like, who you want to be in the trenches fighting with. So
Yeah, I think that's a great concept, and like you figured out these are your three legs of your stool as far as like what's going to drive you. It could change from person to person, right? Or what for you helped you figure out, well, these are my three things. These are what I'm going to focus on. Like, tell us about a little bit more about that journey of like how you figured out those were your three important things.
I would say the formula, is almost like you take your temperature and you say if it's too high, it's your body reacting to something that is foreign to you, right? It's some sort of disease. It's your body fighting it off, right? Um, and when you do that, you have the high temperature, but you have low energy, right? So what I found personally is energy and impact. Like if I can have more of an impact, if I am having more of an impact, if I'm doing more, I wake up excited to go do what I'm doing, and I can accomplish more. Doing it actually energizes me. Then I think that then the formula is working. You put me into scenarios that are not like that. My energy goes first, and they're exhausting. About 10 years ago, I ran for the Virginia House of Delegates. Going out and campaigning and communicating with people, that gave me energy. Like having those conversations, like what is really bothering you? What's the thing that I could potentially impact if I, was to get in this position? That gave me energy. But all of the actual work in running for office is calling people and begging them for money. It's telling them things that they want to hear in order to get them to advocate for you when you're not in the room, because you can't get to that scale to get larger swaths of people and under your umbrella. The engaging with people, what the top level, what you think it would be in that role, was a fraction of it. The majority of it was the type of work that didn't give me energy. That allowed me to make some decisions around what I wanted to do moving forward. So now it's not everything. Like I get tired too, running businesses and that type of thing. There are situations I don't like to deal with, but that I have to. But there's an inverted relationship. Like 95% plus of what I do now gives me energy, and then there's the 5% that's draining. I've been fortunate to find other people to surround myself with that I can trust to handle some of those things that just really, that'll drain the batteries. And because of that, the impact that I'm able to personally have ends up being amplified really, through leadership. And I see it being reflected in the faces and the attitudes and the impact that my team members are all making on a day-to-day basis.
That's such a good concept though, right there. It's like, because sometimes you'll get out of the military, right, and you'll find a role and you think it's going to be this like chunk, right? But then you find out, well, I don't like doing like a majority of the stuff, and you have to pivot and shift, right?
Mhm.
For you, when you figure this out, like what are some of the things that you did to figure out, well, what am I going to do? Or like, what are you going to do next? And what was that journey like?
Man, at each stage, I as I learned, the doing cool stuff that makes an impact with people you like, I was constantly evaluating what I brought to the table and the situation that I was in, and I've always had a mindset of I will do the things that other people don't want to do. People generally don't like reading, you know, policies and laws and regulations, so they pay a lawyer to do it, right? I've always been willing to read and actually seek to understand things. People don't like to really work. Like, just to be candid, people don't want to do work. If they perceive it as work, then it becomes something they try to avoid. If there's something that you're passionate about, it's not really work for you. So if I found that formula of if I'm doing something cool that makes an impact, it never feels like work to me. So I'm willing to do the things that other people won't, right? Which is the activities that ultimately they don't understand necessarily because they weren't willing to read and understand why it was being done. And the last one is the change. Like what I've constantly had the attitude of, people will try to avoid reading, working, and changing. I've always taken, I seek to understand. I do things that I think make an impact, which gives me passion, doesn't really become work. And when things don't make sense and they aren't working, I've always been willing to make those adjustments and apply unconventional approaches, because whoever wrote that, why you're supposed to do it that way or what have you, like they're probably never actually the one that did it to see that it doesn't really work. Having that mindset throughout, when I am diagnosing that there's something missing, I'm looking at, well, what would give me that energy? And it took me years of really figuring out that my passion lies in national security. If I'm tackling the problem that I perceive to be the greatest threat to national security, then I'm going to be always energetic and ready to put in the work to read, work, and change, to solve the problem, apply unconventional approaches, will bring the passion to the people around me, and I've been relentless around surrounding myself with people who are also going to help amplify that message. Right? They're not the same as me. They're all very, very different, but they all are. They all embrace solving the problem, and they recognize that the problem that I'm facing is one that we all face. So that's how I've approached it, and it's meant I've done a bunch of things. Like I've done government contracting, I've been in business development roles, I've solved financial problems, I've worked strategy, I've been in everywhere from coordinating nuclear response exercises to breaking into critical infrastructure, all to being an emergency manager and assessing programs, to supporting global infectious disease, surveillance and response. And I've tried to take from all of those different experiences to create this picture of where I can have the most impact and harness the most energy. And that's really driven me, from probably at least for the last, 9 years. Because there was a time since between me leaving the military, or me leaving special operations and going through the Defense Department into really finding the formula that worked for me. Yeah, so it was probably about a 3-year process for me to get to a point where I knew exactly, I could put my finger on it.
Right.
Is this working or is this not working?
That's awesome to hear that it's not like instant, right? It took you time to figure out like what you want, what you're good at. And one thing I like to tell people all the time is it's not always like the direct experience, right? There's all these things that you took from different pieces of your career. And you were a Sebring guy, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah, I was
was.
a Sebring guy myself too. So there's not many of us out there, but that's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting gears here a little bit, and I you touched on this a little bit when you were just talking as a business owner, and I think this a lot of business owners when they're building their business, you talked about this a lot, getting people around you that kind of are in that same mindset or mentality of you. And for those aspiring business owners out there, like what do you recommend on finding the right people who are going to kind of fit in that puzzle piece of what your business is going to look like?
Don't work with family. I'd start with that. I'm a big proponent. If you're going to lead, you need to be able to generate perspective. And the best way to generate perspective is to put that person's shoes on, and spend some time behind, the shovel that they've got to carry, and dig the foxhole yourself. So I would say don't bring people into your mess until you really understand what mess you're trying to clean up. When I came into this role, it was just me, and it was me until I knew how to sell, how to deliver, how to structure financial reporting, how to manage accountants, how to look at legal agreements and evaluate whether or not it was creating unacceptable levels of risk, how to form a business, how to report on that business. So I'm very much of the mindset of you should know how to do every job in the organization for probably the first 5 years. I avoided bringing anybody into my mess, for lack of a better term, until I was in a position that I could tell them, here's what the level of risk is of you joining this fight with me, right? Because most businesses don't make it past the first 5 years. Most businesses don't grow. There are lots of reasons why. So before I started bringing people in, I made sure I understand what it was I was asking them to do, what rocks they were going to take out of my rucksack. And I think in doing that and communicating openly, I found people at the early stages of the business who were uh, more open to taking risks. And eventually, you have to mature that, right? So there's a shedding of the skin that has to happen as you continue to grow. I am not the same guy that I was, 4.5 years ago when I was a one-man band, and now I'm running two companies. My title in Conquest hasn't changed in that time, but my job has changed, every day for nearly 5 years. And I found that by having done every job, it puts me in a position to better support, to better build and enable my leadership team around me today. Where other people, they take the tact of, hey, you need to find a co-founder, you need to find somebody who balances you out. If you're a nut that's up there, drawing things on a whiteboard and you're great at selling but you can't deliver, find somebody who can deliver. And I'm not going to say that's not potentially the right approach for some people, but I know for me, in order for me to really keep the focus, communicate effectively, and support the team, the best thing that I ever did was I spent about the first 18 months of the business doing every job before I asked anybody else to do it.
It definitely provides that perspective, right? When someone's joining your company, like, oh, you've already done this, you know what it looks like. So then you're not blindly telling, like leading somebody to do a role that, they might not be totally aligned to.
I talk to people about this frequently, but I view leadership much like parenting. It's not
Mhm.
what you tell your kids to do, it's what they see you doing. I do my best to try and set an example. I don't know that it's always a great example. That's just why I'm not the same guy I was 5 years ago, right? I'm constantly working on myself as well, but I do always keep in mind that they're watching me,
Right.
and they're more likely to replicate my behaviors than they are to do what I say when I'm not in the room.
That's a really good segue actually into chapter 11, right? In chapter 11 of your book, you talk about leading and not managing. And you also mentioned this like you have this break this rule concept in your book. And one of those rules to break is leaders eat last. And I want to talk about this because we referenced it in the last episode. One of the guests had talked about like leaders eat last as a concept of leadership. Can you kind of dive into this concept more of breaking rules and what you mean by leaders eat last in this
Yeah.
concept?
Yeah. I'll use an example that I talk about quite frequently. I talk about, I grew up in the special operations community, right? And when we were running around, Iraq and other places, and, people will come up and be like, hey, we know you guys have different rules of engagement. What can you do that we can't do? The existence of different rules of engagement is actually a fallacy. Like, it's the odds of us having a different rule of engagement. Like, sure, it happened, but not in this application. It was really our understanding of the rules of engagement. So when I talk about breaking rules, it's really focused on, don't do anything just because it's a rule, because there's always a situation where if you understood it better, you would do something different. And leaders eat last is something that's very common. Like, it's almost like chivalry, like opening the door for people and using your manners. But the intention behind leaders eat last is that the leaders should bear the consequences for their lack of forethought and their lack of support logistics, because logistics are typically what kills you on the battlefield. And I've got lots of stories about how terrible logistics have resulted in negative outcomes. But if you actually understand the rule, you don't have to worry about eating last and potentially missing that meal, because you've done effective planning and you've ensured that all of your team members were properly resourced. Yeah, and reality is leaders eat whenever they can, because you should constantly be at a different, both emotional and operational stage than the people who you work for, right? And the people you work for are ultimately your team members who are executing on the ground. But that logistics piece, which is really where this leaders eat last thing ties to, I think about that constantly. And I use this example in the community, in the special operations community I lived in. You bring the wrong batteries and people potentially die. Think about, you were a Sebring guy, right? For those who don't know what it is, it's chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. You bring a powered air purifying respirator to put somebody in like a level B protection for potential exposure, but you forget to bring the batteries for that powered air purifying respirator. And now you've got somebody sucking air through a straw through two filters they're about 5 feet away from them. That degrades mission effectiveness significantly. And now they get shot because bad guys have chemical protection too. When you think about that level of consequence, you can't just say I'm going to be bearing the consequences as well in the event that I fail to meet logistics objectives. You just don't have the option. As a leader, you don't have the option of not thinking ahead and ensuring that that your resources, your team members, are all properly fed to be able to, to fulfill the mission. But I think it's worth that story, right? So I was in First Cavalry Division my last tour in Iraq before I went to Special Operations, and that was the 2004 to 2005 time frame where the Mahdi uprising and the Shia militias with Muqtada al-Sadr were starting to put IEDs in the roads in Baghdad and shooting RPGs, that type of thing. And I got there. This is my third trip, but I got there with First Cavalry Division right at the beginning of that. Before we deployed, because we had gone to city warfare, they issued all of us like these ACOG, scopes for our weapons and flashlights and lasers and all this other stuff, right? Thousands and thousands of dollars for every troop. And then they forgot to get the adapters to where we could actually attach them to our weapons. So we went through an entire 13-month deployment with millions of dollars worth of equipment for CQB, for close quarters battle scenarios, that we couldn't use because of a $2 adapter to be able to actually attach it to the version of M16 that we had. It didn't impact the brigade commander or the logistics guy. It only impacted those guys on the grounds who were out there, trying to clear buildings with flashlights they taped, to their barrel, and scopes that were sitting back in the barracks.
What was that experience like for you?
I mean, it motivated me to keep walking when I went through selection, right? Because that's, that trip, beyond the fact that logistics like that were a challenge, and we also dealt with the fact that there wasn't up armor for our Humvees. So we were driving up and down roads, waiting to get hit by improvised explosive devices with like scrap metal that guys had, welded on to the doors that were previously like this soft plastic in the Humvees. But that experience, both the lack of logistics preparation, the lack of forethought, and and how we were executing, the fact that we were driving up and down roads, just acting like carnival toys, like the ducks, go up and down the thing in the carnival. When you end up on a mountain somewhere with a heavy rucksack and you're like, oh, maybe I'll quit, and your option is to go back to that or to keep walking, I started running.
In your deployments, and I guess like in your careers, right? Or I guess like running your business, you're gonna have all these different types of personalities that you have to work with. And one thing in your book that you mention is, personalities do matter. They matter a lot. And what happens for a lot of these veterans transitioning out, they're moving to the civilian role. You talk kind of like, oh, you're going from Call of Duty to Office Space.
Yeah.
What happens when you don't mesh with your coworkers? Like, there's an example in your book that you reference someone named Ava, which is a great example of how Ava was able to overcome some personality differences. Like, how do you recommend when someone's in that situation, like what can they do to overcome those challenges?
So, I mean, step one is you got to drop the sense of entitlement. I think the sense of entitlement is true for a lot of people, but when you get, the veteran community, you walk into scenarios and, let's use this kind of office example, like, and people react negatively to things that you didn't think are that important. You're exemplifying that you have a sense of entitlement because, you don't know what I've been through. I spent 5 years in Iraq. You get into that. If you get into that headspace, you've already lost. This is why I think my route, conventional Army through special operations, and then, I got medically retired, after 11 and a half years, was beneficial for me because when I was in special operations community, I had, you wake up and you have to earn it every day. And that doesn't change when you end up, working at a mom and pop shop or a Fortune 500 company or anywhere else. Like when you wake up and you have to earn it every day, nothing you did before matters. And you can't bank on what you did before. It's almost, I'll go back to the farming analogy. If you had an amazing crop, but you didn't bother to plant for the next season, you're going to starve to death. You have to be constantly earning whatever it is that you think you deserve. As soon as you stop doing that and you're banking on previous experiences or previous impact that you've made, you've already lost intellectually and emotionally. And you can't actually help advocate for people who are in a worse position. And I think that's critical for the veteran community. So if you've transitioned out and you're in a company and you've got coworkers who have, a bias towards the military and be like, oh, all you do is speak in acronyms and you curse too much, or that's not how we operate out here in the civilian world, and that type of attitude, the best thing that you can do for the rest of the veteran community is not react emotionally to that bias that they have and to prove them wrong. just like going into any other community that you're not used to, or that's different. If you went to a different country and they have different cultures, that's all it is. And most of our military veterans are used to working with people from different religions, nationalities, walks of life, partner nations. And unfortunately, because some people have the perception that the civilian community is who they were fighting for and they should constantly be in that thank you for your service mode, it puts them in a different mindset, and ultimately it goes down a negative road. So if you are in that position and you are having some level of success and you have an opportunity in the civilian world, the best thing you can do for them is when they say thank you for your service, be like, the best thank you can do is to overcome your own biases and to enjoy the freedom. But I'm not going to perpetuate any of those biases. And that's important for all of us, because there are people who are struggling, people I know who are struggling with post-traumatic stress. There are a lot of TBIs. It hits close to home for me, right?
Right.
And when the people who are capable of helping to correct that narrative show a sense of entitlement, I think it puts those people who have the potential for working through their problems, like post-traumatic stress and TBI and others, it puts them in a worse spot
Mm-hmm.
to develop and actually become fully functioning members of American society again.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you mentioned, because in a previous episode, someone mentioned, you don't have to be the military guy. You don't have to be that guy who's always talking about the military. You can just be just another person that, is just part of the team, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're getting at, is you don't have to have this sense of entitlement. You come to work every day to work and to contribute and to learn, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's an amazing point that you mentioned there.
Yeah. And I mean, I spent some time as the senior vice commander at Military Order of the Purple Heart in the DC area. And there was a guy, he was a POW in World War II. He was a little guy, sweetest old grandpa you'd ever seen. He had a scrapbook from his military time, and he got out as he spent literally like 3 months in the military before he was captured, and spent time as a POW, and then ultimately came back to the U.S. and never talked about his military service until relatively recently. And I look at that guy and I think about having your military history as a part of your identity versus the contrast of having your military history as your identity. And I think it's important that it's a part of you. But if you think that your best days are when you were, let's call it 18 to 25, and you were with your boys in the desert or the mountains or wherever you were doing your military service, and all those best days are behind you, that's probably the leading cause of people deciding that they don't have anything else to work for, is because they don't believe that their best days are still ahead of them. And I'm here to tell you, I can't subscribe to that. Hey, you're not done. Most people haven't even figured out how to file their own taxes by the time where you're perceiving that those were your best days. You have so much more that you can contribute, so much more that you can do, so much more that you should do. Just find something that you care about, just as much or more. And if you can't, find somebody that you care about just as much or more, because if they have a cause they're passionate about that you just don't understand, maybe that'll become your cause too. But there's no reason why we should be losing anybody to thinking that their best days are behind them just because they happen to do cool stuff in the military.
Right, absolutely. That's very true, and I think that leads into my next question here, because it's like you want to constantly learn, right? And when you get out, you're trying to figure out like what's next. And in your book, you talk about you did a lot of jujitsu training, and you have this anecdote or this story about someone, just like this big dude coming to the gym and to the dojo and battling against, like sparring against a smaller female,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the lessons learned. And then I think that really ties into what you were just speaking about. But leading into my question here is like, how does your jujitsu training parallel to your work in cybersecurity, or even just transitioning in general?
I think jujitsu is the world's greatest personality test. Right? It's not just because I'm a black belt in jujitsu and I've been training for a long time and I think it's a great martial art. It's because you can tell everything you need to know about somebody based off of how they engage with jujitsu. So the example that you pull from my book, somebody comes in, they watch a lot of UFC, they lift a lot of weights. They come in and they think, oh, I used to wrestle in high school and I was a football player, all that. And then they get tied in a knot by a 17-year-old girl that's 110 pounds soaking wet. There's only two reactions you can have from that. Either it makes you believe in jujitsu and you start showing up all the time, or you never enter an academy again. The ones who show up after that, there's some hope for them, right? Because they're able to put their ego aside and realize that somebody is better at something than they are. It's an opportunity for inspiration rather than a condemnation. So you take that person, you decide, all right, this is the type of person who's going to continue showing up. They show up and they get to a point where they train and they train and they train and they're strong and they've got some background in things, and now they're able to submit that girl who happened to be 17 still. And they get their blue belts, and like that's the first rung, right? Typically takes between 6 months and 2 years to get that. And then most of them quit because they drop their ego enough to say, I understand and I respect this skill set. And they get to a point where they set the target of, my target is to be able to get my blue belt and beat this young lady who tied me in a knot. Then you branch off again, and then you end up with people who stay in jiu-jitsu, and it's a small fraction of people who get to blue belt, and then much smaller fraction of people who keep training beyond that because life gets in the way. They've achieved their target. It's almost like getting a bachelor's degree. They're like, yeah, I'm not going to continue to go to school. And then you end up with people who keep progressing, and then they go into two camps. Do you want to be a martial artist, or do you want to be a hobbyist? And the martial artist sacrifices everything in their life, because of jiu-jitsu. And the hobbyist, they show up when they can. They typically train 2-3 times a week. Maybe they compete sometimes, maybe they don't. And both of them, both hobbyists and professionals, get to black belt. And they both get to black belt at about the same time, because you get treated differently when you're a professional that's saying, I want to be the best in the world. I want to do this as my career. I eventually want to become a professional fighter, whatever. And the hobbyist who is training enough to get educated and to maintain their cardio and all that. And that professional black belt will crush that hobbyist black belt because it's a completely different mindset. It's a completely different approach to training. But that hobbyist black belt will still, in just regular jiu-jitsu, sometimes beat this professional, right? Because they're training differently. So I view that I can apply that to everything in life, and every decision people make. Can you get past sucking at something to give yourself an opportunity to be good? And then if you can, do you stop when you feel like you're good enough, or do you keep going because that's contributing value back to you? And in the professional world, you see it all the time. There's people like, I only do this because I know that I'm good at this, and I'm not going to be bad at anything because I think that people will think less of me. And then you've got much more successful people who are okay with not being that good at things, and they think, I'm going to learn, and they get to a point. And then you have the most successful people that wake up every day, are in a routine, crushing it. Their goal is just to be number one, and they're doing everything and sacrificing everything else to do that. And then you've got people who are actually sustainable. And those are the hobbyists they're training all the time. They're moving forward. The hobbyists are much nicer to be around. They're much more personable. If you want to go have a drink, they'll go have a drink with you. You want to go eat pizza, they're cool with that. The professional is so focused on that they're likely to get to a point, they either become champion or whatever, and they're done by 30. So I think you can apply that in every part of business and every part of life, that you don't want to be that first one that comes in and is like, I refuse to be bad at anything. You also really don't want to be that one that good enough is just good enough, where everybody says, oh yeah, I used to train jiu-jitsu, and then life got in the way. Mm-hmm. There's always time to do the things that you're passionate about, and you can prioritize if you don't go to the extreme. And that's where hobbyists can be black belts. They can be very good. They can impart wisdom on you. And they also help everybody around them to say, see that guy who's a professional? That's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage of people who are going to be successful doing that. You can get all of the value out of jiu-jitsu or any martial art by continuing to show up, accept the fact that you might not always win, use it in balance with everything else that you have going. And ultimately, you'll be training until you're 75, where that guy's a professional. He's probably going to end up broken by 30.
Right. I think that's a great last piece there. It's like you want to be a constant learner in life, but you also want to have a little balance, right? You don't want I mean, there are people who will want to go through, be the top of the top, right? The smallest percentile. But a majority of people will be like those. If you want to succeed, being a lifelong learner, and kind of showing up every day is gonna benefit you and your career for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I mean, just in all, to be candid about it, I'm guilty of both. I am very much the mentality that if I decide I want to be good at something, damn the torpedoes, I'm going to be good at it. And then I get to a point where I'm like, all right, I'm good. But I still keep showing up. I still keep training.
Right.
I still keep jumping in the cockpit and flying, showing up to jiujitsu after injuries where my cardio is terrible and I've got some purple belt who just is licking their chops at trying to submit the black belts. And heads up, I still put myself in uncomfortable positions. I still work to try and get better, and I still don't have any ego about having them perceive that I'm not that good. All of that is critical, and you get to a much better mental state when you realize, say, moving forward is what it's all about, not necessarily walking away with the win. Because I don't remember any of those. I do not remember any time that I tapped out, but I guarantee that purple belt or that blue belt who I gave an opportunity to will likely end up staying in jiu-jitsu and training because they feel like they put my belt on their wall.
The awesome final comments there. If someone wants to get in contact with you, they want to roll on the mat with you, or if they have any questions, what's the best way they can follow up?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there. I'm on Twitter, even though I don't engage in a lot of the chaos that is Twitter. Jeff_Conquest. I'll give you my email and you can put it in there. You guys can read the book. If you see me and you're carrying it around, I'm happy to sign it. If you're in the Nashville area and you want to go train, I'm happy to get on the mats too.
Awesome. Is there anything you want to plug?
If you want to buy the book, please do. If you hate it, let me know. I wrote it with the intention of it, at least some people not agreeing with it. I'm still waiting for somebody that's brave enough to tell me that they don't. But that's about getting the word out. Amplify the message. Have something worth fighting for. And if you're a veteran that's that's looking for somebody who's been there, done that, got some T-shirts or some challenge coins, I'm always open to having those conversations. But just know that my boot is going to be in your ass because you guys are capable of a lot more. And your best days are still ahead of you.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the last comments there, Jeff. Appreciate you having you on. This is some awesome information, awesome content. Really excited to share this with everybody.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and now YouTube. Also, please consider leaving a review and let me know what you think. All the links we talked about will be on the show notes, or you can go to tapinwithtako.buzzsprout.com. Talk to y'all next time. Peace.
In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. In the Subaru with my Nikes on the dash. Nikes on the dash, Nikes on the dash.
West side in the field, what's real? I got my whole squad popping like they on 2 pills. No sign unless it got 2 mil. I ain't meek when it come to big banks like my first name Phil.